I am Christina Dudley, VP of Marketing here at Pipe17, and we are so thrilled to have you with us. If you're new to Pipe17's office hours, this is our monthly session where we'll roll up our sleeves, tackle real-world challenges. It's an open Q&A style session, so please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A chat at any time. We have a team of experts standing by to help. This month, we are focused on something that affects every operations team's exception management. Overselling, SKU mismatches, and inaccurate or incomplete data create downstream exceptions that eat up time, disrupt workflows, and impact customer trust. And that is why we're highlighting two specific features designed to keep your Pipe17 workspace cleaner and your team more efficient. One is exception resolution engine, and two is auto dismiss similar exceptions. To show you how this works in practice, I am joined by Dan Fowler, who is our technical product manager, along with a few of our behind the scenes Pipe17 experts who, like I said, are ready to answer your questions live. On that note, a quick housekeeping item. So should you have any questions, you can let me show the screen here. Toggle over to the event tab, select the Q&A sub-tab, and then hit the green Ask a Question button to submit your question. We will answer them as we go if possible, or we will definitely get to them at the end of the open Q&A session. By the end of the session, you should see how these features help you operate with more control, clarity, and confidence across every channel of your business. So with that, grab your coffee or your tea, settle in, and let's get started. Dan, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. We're going to cover a couple of features related to managing exceptions. But before I get into those two specific features, I do kind of want to briefly touch on our strategy for how we're actually creating exceptions. So our approach for creating exceptions is to kind of cast a wide net when creating exceptions, just to make sure that we're not missing anything that might be impactful to your business. The flip side of that is not every exception that we create is going to be relevant for your workflows. The auto dismiss feature that we are about to cover gives you the flexibility to manage those exceptions that are important to you. So that's just kind of a quick topic point before we get into the screen share, keeping in mind that that wide net is cast, but you have the tools to fine tune it for your own specific needs. And on that note, I think we can go ahead and jump into the screen share. So I am going to bring my screen into the, perfect. Okay, as you can see here, we have an order with an exception related to it. Before we get too deep into it, let's actually take a look at the exception itself. So as I scroll down, the exception is in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. And let's look at the components of it. So the first aspect here, you see sent order failure, which is actually the category of the exception. And then lower, you see the actual exception type, which is missing SKU. An important distinction here is the category is more like an umbrella. And underneath that umbrella, you could have multiple different types of exception types. So in this case, sent order failure could have multiple individual exceptions related to it. That's important because we do offer a feature in our exception engine that allows you to simply disable or enable by exception category, but that's a much wider, broader brush, keeping in mind that that would disable all of the individual exception types or individual exceptions associated with that category. What we're actually going to look at here is the ability to auto dismiss at the exception type level. So it's a much more granular process. It's a little bit more fine tuned. So to actually access this feature, we're going to go ahead and walk through the setup of that now. But before we do that, let's lay a little bit of the groundworks for this scenario. So we have an exception here related to missing SKU. What is missing SKU? Missing SKU essentially just means that this particular SKU is not in my product catalog inside Pipe17. In this case, let's say that this is a gift card. And let's also say that I'm actually managing my gift card process outside of Pipe17. So this particular exception is not one that I'm interested in actively managing. So this isn't something that I need to really worry about. I don't want it showing up in my exception log or on my dashboard. So if I wanted to make sure that I never see this exception again and just it's not relevant to my business flows, then I can go ahead and actually create a rule that will auto dismiss this for me moving forward. If I wanted to do that, we simply need to go into the bottom right-hand corner of the exception. And we call this the More Actions menu or the three dots, whichever you prefer. But if we click here, you're going to see a submenu. On the very top, we have Generate Auto Dismiss Rule. I'm going to go ahead and click that. And you're going to see a dialog pop up here, essentially giving you a little bit of an expectation about what this feature is going to do. One big call out here is while we're automatically generating this rule for you, we're not necessarily enabling it or actually turning it on. The idea here is we'll go ahead and automatically create this rule, but we would like you to go and review it and make sure that it's doing exactly what you want it to do. In this case, it's pretty straightforward, but still we want to make sure you're reviewing these and actually taking that next step to enable it, because that is not part of the automation. At this point, I can go ahead and hit the generate rule button here, and we'll think for a few seconds. And now you can see that we have a successful pop-up, so we have successfully created the rule. There's actually a link here underneath. I hope you can see where my mouse is for the review and enable rule. So if I click right on this, it's actually going to take me directly to the rule or at least to the rule screen, and you can see the rule that we just created. We're going to put a badge next to this new rule that says needs review. That's just our way of identifying this rule. So if for whatever reason you weren't able to click on the toast, you still can kind of easily identify which rule we just created so that you know to review it and also then enable it. Just a quick call out in terms of navigation. We're in our automation engine, which is the way you can create automated rules. So if you also just simply need to do that, you would be able to go to the left-hand nav, open up automations, and then you can see we're just inside the exceptions portion of the automation engine. Now that we have that done, let's actually go ahead and take a look at the rule itself to make sure it's doing what we want it to do. The easiest way to do that is we can actually just click this expand, and then we will go ahead and be able to take a look. We're auto-generating name, and just like any other automation rule, you could click into the upper right-hand corner and edit the rule if you'd like, so that you could go ahead and adjust the name. If that's not an important issue for you, then you can kind of just review it in this screen. So scroll down. The important part of this rule here in terms of what we're looking at, there's three criteria that we look at to fine tune this rule. So the first one is the type of entity. So we're looking for orders in this particular case. You can see the entity type filter here. So orders. We're looking at the exception category, which I talked about a little bit earlier. In this case, it's our internal identifiers for the sent order failure. And then here we're down to the granular type, which would be the exception type equals missing SKU. So this rule would essentially go through, and every time this scenario would come up, we would dismiss it on your behalf. This is just simply not an exception that you feel like you need to manage. So this would take care of it on your behalf. So this rule looks good to me. I think this is doing exactly what I wanted to do. And then very simply, now I can actually go up to the upper right-hand corner, the More Actions menu again, and then I can just simply click on Enable Rule. This rule, because I don't need to manage this exception. Please feel free to add a more thoughtful note. This is just me adding it for the purposes of the demo, but yeah, it will show up, and now we can see the badge has turned to enable. So we know that this rule is now active. The next time this exception comes up, it's going to be auto dismissed by this rule. So you no longer have to worry about it showing up in your exception log, and you no longer have to worry about it showing up on your dashboard for requires attention. So it gives you a cleaner experience. The other thing to keep in mind here is I've done this for one exception type, but you can have multiple of these rules. It's not just simply one here. You could actually have a full list of rules that you could have had us create based upon that exception. So you can really dial in what your experience needs to be in terms of your workflows and how you're managing exceptions that are relevant to you and your processes. So that's our first feature for dealing with exception management. This is available from all of the exceptions cards. So you saw me look at this feature from orders, but if you have an exception related to something like products, you could follow the exact same process and we would follow the same template here. So keep that in mind. It's really flexible. It doesn't just have to be the order screen. That just happens to be what I chose to showcase in this demo. So now that we're through the first feature, and hopefully that was insightful for everybody, let's go to our second feature. And our second feature is actually on this exact same page. Let's talk about scheduled rules, or sort of like scheduled resolution rules as it was mentioned in the intro. So to access that page, all we have to do is click on the scheduled rules tab. And then you can see here, you're going to see a list of generated rules on this page. So you're probably asking yourself, okay, what are scheduled rules? Well, there's actually two interesting components to this. So scheduled rules automatically clean up exceptions that no longer require attention. So it's different from auto dismiss in the sense that these are very relevant to your use cases and to your businesses. In fact, some of these are actually very important features that you probably want to manage and you want to pay attention to for exceptions. But the underlying issue has since been resolved. So let's take a look at an example here. So I have two of these rules enabled, and we'll use resolve fulfillment exception if it has been acknowledged, which that essentially is saying you had some type of exception and it kept us from being able to successfully send fulfillments to Shopify. So there was definitely an issue. It's very, very relevant to you. You want to make sure you're able to send fulfillments to Shopify. So you see that there's an exception that's blocking this. You take whatever necessary action is required to clear that exception. And then after that exception is removed, that blocker is cleared, fulfillments start flowing to Shopify successfully again. All the ones that had generally failed, we would automatically send those, so they would get sent. All of those fulfillments would be resolved. There's really no active issue at this point. Everything's working again. All of your orders have been closed out. Life is good. The second thing here about that, though, is you would still have a lot of open exceptions related to that. So every fulfillment that we have would have attempted to send to Shopify would have generated a fulfillment. So we don't want you to have to go then and track down every single scenario related to that issue and then have to manually close it out so that we're not cluttering your exception log or your dashboard. So what this would actually do here is we have something called acknowledged by, which kind of lets us know, hey, we were able to successfully send this to the channel. We know that fulfillments are flowing again. We know that this particular fulfillment, while it does have an exception on it, it was actually sent to the channel. So it's really no longer an active exception blocking this. If I had this enabled as I do here, instead of me having to go and track this down, the scheduled rules will actually do it on your behalf. So that's the first part of what a scheduled rule is, or the idea behind that. The second part that makes scheduled rules is actually the name, the scheduled part of it. So scheduled rules are not something that happens the same way that our other automations do, which would be on creation or update. It's actually on a schedule. So in this case, they run every 3 hours for exceptions that were created within the first 24 hours. And then beyond that, they run once a day. So that is the sort of the second half of the exception management. Let's actually look at some of the specific rules that we do have here. It's important to note that as of now, all of these rules are created and maintained by Pipe17. So it's maintained by my team essentially. If you have a scenario where you feel like you would want an additional rule, we would review that and we would be able to see if it makes sense to add that for everybody. So you are seeing a catered list here. You have the ability to enable or disable, but you do not have the ability to create or edit. We have 6 rules in total, and they're all relatively straightforward. I'm going to touch on them briefly, but don't want to go into too much detail just for the sake of time. So the first one we already saw about acknowledge fulfillments. Resolve the exception if the integration is connected or disabled. That's exactly what it sounds like. So if there was an issue with connectivity, but later we see that that integration is connected again, we'll go ahead and remove the exception on that. It's no longer needs to be managed. Similar concept for the next two rules. I hope you can see my mouse hovering over these. Resolve exceptions on inactive orders, and then resolve exceptions on canceled shipments. The idea being, if there are exceptions here on items that are really not active, something that you don't need to take an action on, remove these from your exception log so that you can prioritize entities that you do need to actively take action on. And then the other one is resolve stuck exception when an order is sent to fulfillment. So if for whatever reason there was a blocker for us being able to create a shipping request and get that to your fulfillment provider, but later it was created and was sent, there's no point in trying to have you manually resolve that exception. We know that that worked successfully, so we will remove it on your behalf. Those are the 6 rules that we have. And the last one that I haven't touched on yet is what we consider our default rule, which is on by default. But there are some caveats to that. So what that does is it actually dismisses exceptions based upon the age. So in this example, you can see that in the title, we're highlighting 40 days. So if you had an exception that was 41 days old, we would automatically resolve that exception just based upon the age. The thought process behind that being, okay, so if this was an active blocker or something that you really needed to focus on, you likely would have focused on that already, depending upon the age. While you cannot disable this, you can actually edit it. And I want to take a quick look at that. So if we go into the edit rule from the more actions menu, here is where you can change that date range. So you don't necessarily have to stick with our default range. And you can do so at a very granular level by setting that per entity type. So you can see here that I have fulfillment set for 60 days, but I could also add something for orders that are 100 days. So we give you a lot of flexibility here, especially with this default rule, to make sure that we're able to manage it per entity that best suits your needs. And that is fairly granular and set, and then you just simply save. Beyond that, those are our 2 main features we have for managing exceptions, making sure that you can go through and keep all of your exceptions prioritized and now managed at an appropriate level for your business. On that note, I think that brings Christina back and us to our Q&A part of this session.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, we've gotten a couple questions, and just as a reminder, please keep submitting them. We'll get to them as we go. So question number 1, can you please explain exception categories versus type again? And where do we go to see, read, learn all of the categories and what the types are?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And that's something I wanted to make sure I called out at the beginning because we do have the ability to disable and enable at the category level. But let's go back. One of the easy ways to actually look at this is let's pull up the exception engine, which is the way you can disable entire categories. And once we get to that page, I'll talk a little bit more about how exception categories and exception types work with one another. So if we scroll through all of my cool integrations here, we'll go down and we'll click into the exceptions engine. And we'll use this as an example. So stuck order is the category. It's more like a high level holding container for a lot of individual exception types. So at the high level, at the more broad level, you have category, in this case, stuck order. But underneath that level, you might have several individual exception types. And what I showed you at the beginning was a way to really manage those individual types where it's, something like missing SKU is not relevant to you. But if for whatever reason you just don't feel like you need to manage an entire category and you don't want to go to the level of setting up individual rules, if you come to the exceptions engine page, you have the ability to do 2 things. You can decide whether or not you want to be, enable whether or not you want an email notification to come, but you can also decide whether or not you want to disable the entire category, which is obviously a little bit quicker. But if you need to fine tune your exceptions, auto dismiss would be the way to go in that. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, definitely feel free to ask a follow up question.
Awesome. Uh, Brian Costa asked, what is the difference between dismiss and resolve?
That's actually a great question, and I have asked the same question when I started at Pipe17. So really, the way that I see that is intent. In terms of actual management and the way our UI functions mainly off of active exceptions. So if you see something within your order screen, if you see something on your product detail screen, those are going to always be active exceptions. The reason why we're setting dismissed on the auto dismiss rule is the idea here is you're dismissing this rule. You haven't really resolved it. It's just simply not, it's not something that is important to you. So it's more dismissed. And the idea behind the resolution is semantically, there was a very important issue here, but you have since resolved it. So that's why you're seeing the two different statuses. We are thinking about streamlining that into one because there's a sort of implication there that these are going to do two different things, but in essence, they're kind of one and the same. So we might actually simplify that in the future to make this a little bit easier to understand. Because Brian, I had the exact same question you did when I was first starting to prep for these features.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. Okay, so third question from Megan Escobar. I get intermittent exceptions when Pipe 17 tries pushing fulfillments from Pipe 17 to NetSuite. I'm able to resolve these by rerunning the event, but it is time consuming. Can I leverage automation rules to auto retry fulfillments with this exception?
I don't know if there's a way for us to auto retry to actually do that from Automation Engine, but I would be interested in actually exploring that specific use case, Megan. So if there's something we could do to review that scenario and see kind of what's going on and see if we can actually improve that situation for you, I would like to take a closer look at that. So beyond that, I would love to get more details.
Cool. We'll reach out and follow up, Megan, with you.
Generally speaking, I wouldn't want to necessarily blindly retry based upon exception because there might actually be something active there. So I don't know if that would be our best path forward, but I would offline, I would love to get more information about that and see if we can help you deal with that situation.
Great. All right, we have another question and we have time for some more. So keep them coming if the audience still has more. As a reminder, you can go to the events tab, toggle down to the sub tab of Q&A, and then ask your question with hitting the teal button. What is the best process for clearing order exceptions where the orders are fulfilled and are not falling off the exception list and I cannot select to update that status to dismiss?
So you have So your scenario is these exceptions have actually been cleared and they're no longer active and they're showing. I wonder if we could get, is there ability to follow up and get clarification? I think one thing to keep in mind is, and one thing that I haven't showed is underneath our events, we do have a specific exceptions log, which gives you the ability to not only look at active exceptions, but you can look at both dismissed and resolved. If you see there's something a little bit strange there, you can use that page to really narrow down your data set and dive into it. You can even filter by status there. So as I kind of mentioned earlier, our UI really runs on the principle of showing you active exceptions within your views. So when something is dismissed or resolved, you're not going to see it in the UI. But the underneath events in the exception log is a great way to still access that data and to look at it. So if you're seeing some strangeness there, I would recommend taking a look at that. And you do have the ability from within that page to actually update the status of exceptions. And you can do it across entity and you can do it in bulk. So if you do need to do some manual interactions with exceptions, that's one way you can do it.
Great. All right. Let's see. I think we've made it through the questions that I can see so far. Let me just pivot over here. All righty. Let's see. Here is one. how do I see a history of auto resolved exceptions?
Okay, so that's a great question. So kind of the idea behind that might be I want to kind of just verify and audit what a lot of my auto dismiss rules are doing. Underneath the automations tab on the left navigation, if you scroll down, you're going to see something called history, which you're going to see all of the individual automation runs there, including your auto dismiss rules that we have generated for you. And you're going to be able to tie them back by name, and you'll be able to navigate to those exceptions. So if you see that, in fact, I might be able to, we have a little bit of time, so I'll share my screen real quick. Let me see if I can do that again and not mess up. So now I'm going to bring my screen to the front. I did it. All right. I knew I could do it. Okay. So now just kind of going back to the point in the automations tab at the lower, if you click into history here, you'll actually be able to see all of the automations and the entity type here. So normally you're going to see a more clearly defined name for exceptions, but I had to obviously run this through from a demo perspective. So I had to delete my rules after I created them to be able to recreate them here. But this is a great way for you to actually audit all of the automations that are coming through. You can tie it back to a specific rule, specific type, specific entity. So it's a good way to audit that. And on that one, I'm going to take my screen back off. Oh, you did it.
All righty. Great. I think that wraps us. If there are any more questions, final call. Otherwise, thank you so much, Dan, and thank you to everyone who joined us today. We really hope this session was helpful. You'll definitely receive a recording of today's office hours and a short recap with links and resources. A couple of things. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover in future office hours, you can send an email to either your account manager or to marketing@pipe17.com, and we would love to add that to our consideration set for future topics. And if you'd like to go deeper, whether that's building exception rules, reviewing your workflows, or exploring more advanced automations, you can also reach out to your account manager or submit a ticket in the Pipe17 app anytime. Stay tuned for details on next month's December customer office hours. And until then, happy selling and smooth operations.